Welcome to the Object-Oriented UX Podcast, a podcast about tackling complexity head-on, gracefully organizing massive amounts of information, facilitating cross-functional collaboration like a boss, iterating strategically and designing scalable, future-proof, and of course, naturally intuitive object-oriented user experiences. An OUXer is a powerful blend of information architect, business analyst, and UX strategist. If this sounds like you or what you aspire to, you are so in the right place. I'm Sophia, user experience designer and chief evangelist for object-oriented UX. I've taught OUX to companies big and small and to thousands of individual designers like you, and I am honored to be your host. What's up, OUXers? I've got a treat for you. This is the beginning of a new series that I am very excited about, a series of solo episodes where I'm going to be going through every step of the ORCA process. That's 15 steps. I'm going to be going through every step, and I'm going to grab a nugget from each of those steps and really just go over all my best tips and tricks and basically like how I do this and why I do this. So I'm not going to be going over the entire step of the ORCA, of each of these steps, but I'm going to really just hone in on one of the most important pieces. So this will be a 15 episode series. Oh my gosh. So I am on an every 3-week schedule for the podcast, but we'll see how this goes because I've got some interviews coming up too. And I don't want this to take forever. I'm just realizing that wow, okay, 15 times every 3 weeks. That's 45 weeks? That's almost a year. So maybe I'll do maybe they'll be shorter. We'll see how long this one is. I have a lot to cover today, but maybe these will be shorter episodes. Maybe I'll kind of pop them in. We'll see how it goes. So this first one that I'm going to be doing is going to be on object discovery. That is the first step of the ORCA process. And I'm going to be talking about the lovely darling of noun foraging and really just getting into how I do it. It's just some of those nitty gritty tips that have evolved over the years and some of the sources that I use for noun foraging. So this is going to be super applicable and hopefully really, really helpful. So I'm not going to go over everything that we talk about in the masterclass when it comes to object discovery. We're not going to be talking about object consolidation or defining lists or instancing and all the other goodies that are in the masterclass. I'm really just going to be talking about noun foraging today. So just to quickly recap the ORCA process before we dive into noun foraging, which is within the first step of the ORCA process of object discovery. ORCA stands for objects, relationships, calls to action, and attributes. Okay, those are the main pillars of the ORCA process. And then we have rounds of the ORCA process where we basically iterate on our O's, our R's, our C's, and our A's to get more and more clarity. So we have a discovery round, which is all about just sussing out the questions, figuring out the lay of the land. Then we've got a requirements round where we go into it's like practicing UX at very high fidelity, high information fidelity and requirements fidelity, not visual fidelity, where we just put everything under a microscope, our O's, our R's, our C's, and our A's, get a lot of clarity. And then we go into prioritization where we kill some darlings and we basically say what is the core of the system? What can come later? And we kind of build a roadmap from a user needs perspective, from a business perspective, from a content perspective, what content do we actually have right now and we can produce, and from a technology perspective as well. And then we go into representation where the O's, the R's, the C's, and the A's come together into screens, mainly our cards, our details, and our lists, which all of that then goes into interaction design. Okay, so where we kind of hand off to all the tools that we already know and love, where we figure out how does a user actually interact with this product. We've got this really nice foundation for all of that to hang on. Okay, so you can think of that ORCA process as sitting nicely in the middle of the double diamond. It's almost like a third diamond. I've got an article on that. If you just Google ORCA process, I'm pretty sure that article will come right up to the top, or check out my Medium. it's in there. And it's something called, what is it called? The third diamond, third diamond of the design process, something like that. So, and really kind of it's basically the ORCA process is taking a whole bunch of information, research information, requirements information, taking it all in. It's a structured process for taking all of that chaos and building that into information architecture and structure and requirements so that then you can go into design really confidently, right? And you're not just doing a lot of guesswork. So I've got 10 things that I want to talk to you about when it comes to noun foraging, my 10 hot tips, basically. But before we get into that, what is noun foraging? Why do you do it? So noun foraging, the very first thing you do in the ORCA process is basically like, think about the top of the funnel. It's where you take in all of that chaos and you synthesize everything that you have to work with, whether it is a ton of information or sometimes not very much information. It's all about being resourceful, figuring out all of these inputs, right, into the process and really coming out with a set of potential objects through looking for the nouns that you are seeing over and over and over again. Okay, it's going to feed object consolidation, which is basically a quick prioritization that happens really within that first step to decide, okay, what are we going to move forward with in this process? The noun foraging usually is not done incredibly collaboratively. Usually, in my experience, it's been just me. The collaboration comes from basically the diversity of inputs that I'm taking in, but usually it is me, the OUXer, or maybe another designer working with me, kind of dividing and conquering, doing this work. And then the collaboration really comes from the output of the noun foraging. That's how it's worked for me. The good news here is even if you're not doing the rest of the ORCA process, even if you're just doing noun foraging, it totally stands alone. It really does help bring clarity to if you don't have full understanding, really understanding, okay, what are all these nouns and which nouns do I not know what they are? Which nouns do I need to ask questions about? Just doing the noun foraging alone is incredibly valuable. So even if you're not doing the other all the other steps of the process, if you're just doing this, you're gonna get some really good value out of it. So really the goal of noun foraging is to gain a solid domain understanding and an understanding of user needs without getting distracted by a whole bunch of screens and UI implementation. All right, you're really extracting, you are going to be looking at some screens, but you are extracting the language, all right? It's like meaning extraction without looking at a given solution from a competitor, well, you're looking at it, but without getting distracted by a given solution from past legacy systems or competitors. You're really just trying to take out the meaning. And I don't want to go down a whole rabbit hole here, but I think this is a big problem, is what we do is we end up regurgitating existing solutions, right? We look at what Google's doing. We look at what Facebook's doing. We look at what Instacart is doing or these other kind of competitors or comparative analysis. And we just copy it. We just copy it and reframe it. We're copying those screens or we're copying those interaction patterns. And those interaction patterns and those screens and that information, or even like the way that it's constructed, the mental model, because so many big companies are not doing this work of building conceptual models before they actually go into screens. We're just regurgitating crap. we're copying Google, but Google doesn't know what they're doing either. Google has shit UX. Apple has shit UX. All right. Okay. Calm down, Sophia. But it's true, right? We can't just look to screens and implementations and then say, okay, well, they're doing it must be right. No. Don't do that. Just because some big tech company is doing it does not make it right and does not make it applicable to what you are doing. Okay, so noun foraging in this first step of the process is really about stepping away, taking we are going to look at competitors. We are going to look at the existing information and existing screens in our legacy systems, but we're looking at the language that's being used. Okay, we're not looking at the implementation. So noun foraging pulls us away from what has been done so we can really think clearly about an implementation that's going to make the most sense. Okay, cool. What I will also say is noun foraging, this is a garbage in, garbage out process, okay? If your research is not good, if your materials are not good coming in, your output's not going to be good either. But the cool thing about the ORCA process is this is going to show you that you have garbage coming in. All the assumptions can't hide from this process. Confusion can't hide from this process. Questions, these big important questions really can't hide. So you're going to get kicked back to research. All right. It's a gauntlet, right? It's a gauntlet between research and design to basically say, you know what? You don't have enough information yet. You better go back to research. We can feed those questions, whether you are the UX researcher or you have a team of UX researchers. This process alongside your UX researchers can help you identify areas, really important areas for additional research so that you don't waste your time in design basing it on high-risk assumptions. Okay, so this is a garbage in, garbage out process, but it's also a gauntlet that helps you realize that you're dealing with a bunch of garbage. Cool? Awesome. So other goals of this, I haven't even gotten it to my 10 tips yet, is to really hone in on those questions. I just kind of touched on that, but hone in on those questions to realize, okay, maybe we don't have enough information, or through the rest of the process, when I get everybody in the right room, when I start collaborating, I've got a really good set of questions to start with. Okay, so it's a lot of like noun foraging helps you know what you don't know, okay? Understand what you don't understand, all right? Which is a big part of wisdom, right? Knowing what you don't know, okay? The other thing is to start honing in on scope and questions around scope, okay? This whole process is great for scope. And when I say this whole process, I mean the ORCA process, all right? When I've been saying this whole process, I'm talking about overarching the ORCA process. Sometimes it is. Wait, ORCA, ORCA. How do you spell ORCA? OCRA. Sometimes it is the ORCA process. Sometimes we mix things. This is what's so great about the ORCA process. It is totally remixable. When I was talking about those, the okra process. I love okra. Oh my goodness. I'm a Southern girl. I do love my okra. We can mix the rounds. Sometimes we do prioritization before requirements. Sometimes we do CTAs before relationships. That can happen too. It can be the ORCA process. But the ORCA process is very remixable. But one of the great things that it does is hone in on scope. And noun foraging starts to realize the potential messiness of that scope to be like, oh man, we got to rein this in because there are a lot of concepts here we can deal with. And this process, what it's going to help you do is narrow that down early on and decide like what concepts are we dealing with now and what concepts are we not dealing with now, or what concepts are just totally out of our wheelhouse. And of course, if you are using the entire process, noun foraging is going to feed it. So the beautiful thing about this remixable, flexible process is that one step does feed into the next, okay? So even though it is remixable, I know that seems counterintuitive, but it's true. And if any of y'all have done, those who have done the ORCA process know this to be true, that it is remixable, but still one step is always going to feed the other step. All right, should we get into those tips? Let's talk about it. Okay, so this is sort of in order of like a process for noun foraging, but not really, okay? So first thing, gather a diverse set of materials. Okay, and I'm going to talk to you about some of the things that I love to noun forage from. Okay, number one, user interview transcripts. Talk to your researchers. Get all of that messy raw data and start going through those user interview transcripts. All right, that is like hearing it from the horse's mouth. Another great way to hear it from the horse's mouth is talk to your customer service folks and get chat logs from customer service, or even call logs if you have those recordings and you can get to those recordings. That is amazing too. Get transcripts created from those so that you can look through them or just listening through them. Case studies. So going on your marketing site, if there is a marketing site for your product, how does the marketing department talk about the value that it's supposed to have, right, of your product or your system? Okay, so going to the marketing site, reading case studies, or press releases even, those kind of things. How is the team trying to sell this product is actually really, really valuable. Like I said, the existing system. Go through your existing screens and look for the labels. What kind of, like, what's in the top navigation? What is being labeled? Look for those nouns. Again, as you're going through this, you're looking for the nouns that are showing up over and over and over again. So looking at your existing system, looking at competitor systems. Yeah, what kind of nouns are they using as well? Okay, those are just some of them. Of course, you're going to want to look to your subject matter experts and your stakeholders as well. If there's a vision deck, right? If there is other kind of strategy decks, you can noun forage those strategy decks. Also, going back to your user research, not just the raw material from user research, but if you do have a user research team and they have created artifacts such as research summary decks, research strategy decks, grab those too and noun forage from those as well. What you want to be looking at is not just a diverse set of materials, but a diverse set of sources of those materials, right? Sources from your users, sources from your UX researchers from within your own UX design team, sources from the business as well. You can also bring in your developers and look at how does the existing data structure work, okay? So what are the objects in an existing data structure? So an interview that usually isn't incredibly available. You're probably gonna have to talk to one of your backend developers, right? Okay, how are our databases actually set up, right? What are we pulling from different APIs? You can look at that too, right? So you're looking from a diversity of resources from a diversity of sources. Okay. And the more diverse you can get with this, the more you can kind of be like cross-referencing, right? Another thing I've loved looking at is training videos as well. So if it's like a B2B system, or like, actually doesn't have to be to B2B, if it's anything that like there are training videos or training materials, how is your like instructional design talking about this tool and walking people through? This also helps you realize some usability issues too, because there shouldn't be, depending on your system, like, is there training because it's more like this is how to use it, or like this is what buttons you need to push, right? That's not really what you're looking at, but just again, you're looking for those nouns and how people are talking. How are the instructional designers talking about this? Another way, going back to the horse's mouth, weird saying, going back to straight from what your users are saying. Just to recap, user interview transcripts, if you don't have those, chat logs, search logs as well is a really great way to see like what kind of content is being searched for. They will often be searching for instances, but you can back into the object, right? So the instance is actually what's being typed in. So if it's a person's name, right, then maybe it's like, okay, person might be an object, or if it's a certain, I've got an example. Let's do recipes. So if somebody's searching like beef with broccoli, right? Okay, you can probably think like beef with broccoli sounds like a recipe, or maybe a type of meal or something. So what is exactly beef with broccoli? You can kind of back in from search logs. What was the other one? Oh, going to where your users are talking. So if there is an influencer user, right, that you have like somebody that is right in your user type, and they are, let's say you're creating some sort of recipe app, go and look at famous chefs. How are they talking? Like or looking at comments within existing sites. Like, where are your users using their voice? Grabbing that, and again, looking for the nouns that are showing up over and over again. And you're probably thinking of even other places to go, but you really just want to go as diverse as possible. Got it? Cool. So diverse materials. Second, print materials. Actually print them out. Okay. Then you can recycle it afterward. This is trees dying for a very, very good cause. Okay. I believe that. I am such a tree hugger. I love some trees. All right. But printing out, this is good stuff. So you don't have to print everything. Okay. And I'll talk about that in a second. Maybe some things that you don't want to print, but print, even like if you have user interview transcripts, like ask your researchers, like let's say you have like 20 user interview transcripts. ask your researchers which of these interviews are going to be the really juicy ones. So maybe you print out 5 of those to really go through. And then we'll talk about what to do with the other ones. Copying and pasting into a Google Doc or whatever, Word doc, whatever. So if you're looking at case studies and like there's a lot of images and stuff like that, just so your printing is more efficient, I will often have a long Google Doc where I'm just taking language and I'm putting language into the Google Doc. And then I'll print out that like 30-page Google Doc. And I often also encourage you not to print front and back if you want to show your work, right? You can do front and back and then take pictures. It just kind of like sometimes depending on the audience, and if you have a skeptical audience and they really want to know like, okay, where is all this information coming from? Sometimes it's very, very effective to show all of your printouts with all of your highlights on them because you're going to be actively reading this with a blue highlighter, right? So showing like a picture of, the 30 pages laid out with all of your highlighting, even like a picture says 1,000 words, like being able to like for a stakeholder to see that and be like, okay, yeah, a lot of sources went in, and like listing your sources too. Okay. I don't do a whole lot of tracking to be like, okay, this noun came from this source. If you need to do that, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that sucks. I have not had that level of traceability needed for a really long time, but you might need to do that, but I don't do that. Okay. I do list, here's all the sources that I went through. With Noun Foraging, and here's now all the nouns that came out of that, okay? Some things not to print, screenshots, okay? So I will often paste those into like FigJam or Whimsical or Miro or wherever, and then use digital blue sticky notes to kind of overlay on top of those screenshots. So there are things that you don't make as much sense to print. So print those materials, pour over them by hand, step away from the computer. I love doing this. It's that mind-body connection. It's the sidebar, little sidebar diagrams that you might make, doing some system modeling on the side. You often are doing that. I think that might be another one of my tips. Maybe we'll get to that more. Another just kind of like quick tip about taking pictures, don't staple because then it's hard to kind of like lay it all out to take a picture of the amazing amount of information that you went through. And you can go through a lot in a day, right? I mean, 10 hours, I would say like for something really complex, I'll probably take about 10 hours or so of noun foraging. Then you're going to start getting diminishing returns. I mean, you might even spend like 3 or 4 hours. A day or two is plenty. Okay, so that's a sidebar tip on how long it takes. Doesn't really take that long because again, like you will start just hearing the same things over and over and over again. Okay, number 3. This might be a long one. Okay, I've got a lot to say about this stuff. Number 3 is a fun one. Get cozy. You've got your printout. Enjoy this. This stuff is super fun. This is like, there's so much that's fun about the ORCA process, but this is like every step and every little activity to me is very precious. And this is like, you get to be away from the computer. Like, get a hot beverage, light a candle. This is a great passive activity, okay? I mean, you're actively reading, but you're just taking it all in. You're letting it wash over you. And so much of what we do is so like lean in. This is one of those beautiful, you can kind of lean back with this, right? Get comfortable, enjoy it, all right? Enjoy this process. It is super fun, and you can just know that you're doing something really effective. So we do need to balance the kind of work that we do. It can't all be like creative output, right? This is more you're taking it all in, and just know that the ORCA process is going to help you synthesize all the information that you're coming up with. Okay, now that you've gone through your printouts, tip 4, because this is not really, it's kind of in order, sort of in order. Step 4, get back on the computer and do some automated noun foraging. And this, again, I said this isn't really a step, like depending on the information that's coming in, you might do the automated noun foraging first before you do the printing out. Yeah, depends. Or you might go back and forth between it. So automated noun foraging. All right, I'm going to point you toward a OUX happy hour episode with Rick Williams on how he is doing this and kind of taking it and processing it in some spreadsheets that That episode also has the materials linked to it as well. So there's some templates there for you. I will link to that. Or if for some reason you just want to Google it, you can probably Google Rick Williams without a C and automated noun foraging OUX happy hour. But do that in YouTube and it'll come up. Another fun thing for automated noun foraging is using ChatGPT. Oh my goodness, this is fun. And this is, again, why you want to go back to number one, diverse materials. Do not just go to ChatGPT to do this, okay? ChatGPT is going to regurgitate a bunch of stuff that we already know, okay? You need to cross-reference this with other materials, okay? This is my biggest fear about ChatGPT. I'm not going to go down another rabbit hole, but that we would just use ChatGPT. And that we could just kind of recycle information over and over again, whether it's right or wrong. That's maybe another episode, another conversation. But this is good for one of your inputs. So, for example, you might ask ChatGPT, what is the mental model of a Pilates instructor? If you're creating something for Pilates instructors, what is the mental model of an at-home aspiring chef? And it gives you stuff back. It's really, really cool. You can also ask questions like, what are the main concepts in Pilates? Or what are the main concepts in learning to cook? ChatGPT will give you an answer. And then what you can do is you can take that answer, you can copy and paste it into a new message to ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT to then pull out all the nouns and give them to you in a ranked, to rank them basically. And what it will do is it will actually count the nouns for you and it will give you an output of which nouns are being used the most. So you can also do this. You can paste an entire user interview. I don't know, is there a character limit? Maybe a section of a user interview. So you can paste material in and then ask it, hey, what are the most common nouns? Please rank the most common nouns. And it will do that for you. Okay. So again, always pair this with a manual process to get some context, to get that diversity of inputs. You do not want to just be using this. Can't say that enough. Okay. Number 5, create your own notation system. All right. For just your own notation system, I'll tell you about some of my notation systems as you're doing this, but you might have a notation system for a specific project, all right? And make a key of your notation system. And your notation system will also evolve as you go through the material. So first and foremost, I love highlighting my nouns with a blue because objects are on blue. We love our color coding. So get yourself some blue highlighters. And then what I do is I highlight objects and I underline instances. Okay, so I love the highlighters that can they do the thick and the thin so that it's and blue is a good highlighter too because you can write too. You can highlight and you can actually write a note with it as well because you are going to be doing, especially when you're in your print, you're in your cozy spot with your little candle and your coffee or your tea, and you're going to want to be making little sidebar notes for sure as you go through all of this material. But you might have additional notation systems. For example, you might have a special star that means something, or circling might mean something. If it's like specific goals that are coming out, like, okay, like this is an object that maybe like one of our stakeholders is really excited about or something like that. So whatever it is, a notation system will evolve. And just kind of know that you're not just highlighting nouns. You might also be underlying instances. You might be making little stars or circling some things as you go through this process. So again, be flexible with it, create a notation system and document your notation system. Create a little key for yourself so that if your noun foraging does span multiple days or even a weekend or something, you know what you were actually doing. Because I forget. All right. Number 6, remember SIP. Okay. SIP stands for structure, instances, and purpose. We talk about it a whole lot in the masterclass. So use SIP, but balance being discerning on, is it an object? Does it have structure, instances, and purpose? Okay. But also be liberal. All right. So you don't want to be curating too much right now, because once you go into object consolidation hopefully collaboratively, you're going to be surprised on what people end up prioritizing. All right. So you don't necessarily want to be making decisions on, is this the object? You're more making a decision on, is this a object, right? So there's some nouns that you're not going to be highlighting. All right. So things like really abstract nouns that like are not going to have instances within your system or don't have purpose within your systems, that within your particular system that you're working on. But even if it's just a domain object that you're like, well, this isn't in our current system, and I really don't think, like, you're doing the foraging, you're not consolidating at this point, but you do want to at least separate the wheat from the chaff, right? You want to be foraging the gems, right? But then later on, you're going to decide which gems you actually want to put in the system. Does that analogy make sense? So really balance being discerning with being liberal and not curating too much. Okay. Ask if it's an object, not if it's the right object. Okay. That's for your team to determine collaboratively. Okay. So go back to SIP. And also, like I said, I do often will underline a few instances. It's good to have that instance, those instances for storytelling that you might do later. Okay, so you can kind of like talk through some scenarios with real instances. That helps a lot. Number 7, highlight repeats to an extent. Okay, I kind of go back and forth on this. I'd be interested to hear how you handle repeats. This is basically like the word recipe is, after it's shown up 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times, you're pretty sure it's going to be an object that is going to go into that object consolidation exercise, okay? That we're going to have to determine on, with a team. So once I've highlighted something like 10 plus times, I'm pretty sure that it's a candidate for an object. So you might do some frequency tracking if you feel like scoping is going to be contentious. Okay, if it's going to be tough to get people to agree on what the objects are, you might want to have that extra data for ammunition. Okay, I have not had that be a big problem. Usually when we go into consolidation, the objects do kind of rise to the top pretty nicely with the team. So like being able to say like this object showed up 500 times and this object only showed up 450 times hasn't been something that I've needed. All right. Now, your automated noun foraging, if you are using Rick's methodology, and also ChatGPT will help you with that to kind of show like rough frequencies, but don't get obsessive about that because that's going to like take up a lot of your time. Okay. So maybe if you do have a little bit of weighting, then that's as far as I would go. But in my experience, when we do go into object consolidation, I don't give my participants any weighting. I don't tell them like, okay, this object showed up way more. This noun showed up way more than this noun. This potential object didn't show up as much as this potential object. I'm not really doing that, okay? But I do highlight repeats just so I like, okay, now I feel really confident. I'm not going to highlight recipe anymore because I know it's going into the bag, right? That said, number 8, we're at number 8 here, capture synonyms and potential synonyms. Watch out for words that are used like synonyms but might not be synonyms. Those are really good to capture. So if you hear recipe meal, or like for the Pilates instructor, like you hear body part and muscle group, right? Like I would capture both of those and both of those would go into object consolidation because I want those conversations to happen on, are these things the same thing or are these things different? Like, are they actual, like I don't make a whole lot of assumptions on is something a synonym or not, especially with complex stuff. Because often I'll be very surprised. And like I give the example so many times with when working with Delta, how like I learned that a flight and a trip are 2 different things, or a leg and a segment are different or the same thing, I actually forgot. Are those the same or are those different? But like having these different words mean the same thing. Like I was thinking leg, and just for example's sake, I was thinking leg and a segment were very different things, but it turns out that they're the same thing. Okay. So you want those conversations to happen. So definitely, even if you're like, those are probably synonyms, grab them both. Okay. So that can go into object consolidation, and people can tell you, yeah, these are synonyms. Or no, they're not. They're actually very different things. And then your question is, if they're different, how do they relate to each other? getting into a little bit of relationships. And those relationships conversations do happen in object discovery. Like everything, like if you know me at all, you know that I like to put things in nice, neat little boxes, but I am also very self-aware that this all kind of blends together. So we are going to need to have some conversations about relationships. That's more when we get into object consolidation and the object guide and definitions. But that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about noun foraging. Stay on track. Okay. So number 9, this leads right in from number 8, identify questions along the way. Okay, so what a lot of those main questions are around synonyms. Are these two things different or are they the same? There's other questions that are going to come up. What is this thing? Right? So this is the point that makes it all worthwhile, even if you're not using any of the rest of the ORCA process. Okay, although I don't know why you wouldn't, because it's awesome. But just identifying that you don't know what a thing is. All right. What is a reference designator? What is a record locator? Are they the same thing? If not, how are they related? Is a policy the same thing as a policy configuration? Is a policy exception the same thing as an exception policy? These are all real nouns from my experience, right? That turned into big, juicy conversations. With Autodesk, which I talked about in the last podcast, is a design and a part and a CAD file. Are all those things the same thing or are they different things? Okay. So, but you're going to have other questions are going to come up too around these things and maybe a little bit on how they relate to each other. But just like questions about the domain are going to come up. Okay. That might not even, just through the process of noun foraging, you will come up with other questions. Okay. So that all said, document those questions, have a parking lot of running questions. And before you get into a collaborative session with and I'm sorry if this is like insulting your intelligence, but I do feel like I've worked with some junior and even senior level UX designers that, that need to hear this. Don't ask your stakeholders things that you can Google or ask ChatGPT. All right. So you have your parking lot list of questions. And then before you get into a collaborative session where you play question whack-a-mole, because the answer to every other question, to answer to most questions leads to additional questions. But before you get into that, try to answer as many of the questions yourself, right? Go and Google it. See if you can dig up your own answer. Okay. Even if you did dig up an answer, you might still want to ask the team because it might just generate a discussion and it might even show that different people on the team don't know. So even though you've Googled it and you know the answer, come into the session with that knowledge, but you still might decide to ask that question because other people might not know. Or you can say, hey, when looking into it, like this is what I found out. Is that accurate? So that you all can get on the same page, okay? Because some of these sticky things, like somebody might have worked at the organization. You might have a stakeholder or subject matter expert in one area versus another area that didn't know the answer to these. I've had this happen so much where I run these workshops in the ORCA sprints and people come out of them, people that have been working at the company for 5, 10, 15 years, and they say how they understand their system and their domain more than they ever have before. Through going through this process. Okay. So Google it, but you still might want to bring that up. Okay. If it's a sticky point, use your best judgment. Okay. Last one for the twist. Don't just noun forage. Okay. You can forage for all sorts of grammar. I've considered do we actually call this language foraging, grammar foraging, meaning foraging? Okay, so when I'm doing this, I'm using that blue highlighter mostly. That's what I'm really focusing on. But I've got a green and a yellow and a pink highlighter there with me too. Okay, so green for verbs. So if I'm looking at verbs those are probably going to be calls to action. Yellow for core content. Usually that doesn't come up too much, but metadata will come up for my pink highlighter. I'll use that quite a bit. All right. So and this is again, creates really beautiful pictures, right? When you have just do it for the pictures. I'm joking. But when you lay all those pages out that you printed and you have all this color coding happening, this is a really beautiful thing. Okay. So if you are a beginner, start with the nouns, okay? Just really, really focus on the nouns. This is how I teach it in the masterclass. We start with the nouns, and then later on I'm like, okay, now that you're a little bit better at this and you really got it like foraging for the nouns, start introducing, like in the beginning, this is like an amazing way to do discovery, is to have all 4 of those ORCA colors in play, okay? So you might even have multiple colors on a single word for some real nice advanced moves. So for example, you might hear in a user interview, I go here to see all my updates. And you got to read between the lines too. And you say, okay, this is also like recently updated tickets. So updates could be highlighted in blue as well as green and as well as pink, because update is a verb. Last updated, the timestamp of when it's last updated would be pink. And the fact that updates is actually a word for an updated ticket, I might have it in blue as well. All right. So you can get kind of colorful with this and have a lot of fun with actually foraging for meaning, foraging for adjectives and for verbs. Okay. And nouns that might not be objects, like price. Okay, well, that's a noun, but that's not going to be an object likely. That's going to be metadata on another object, okay? So going back to SIP, structure, instances, and purpose, okay? There's actually a second P, all right? That second P in SIP is pluralization. People don't go to the site to see all their prices, right? They go to see prices on something else, okay? So you might actually be highlighting nouns that are core content or metadata, okay? So if you want, that's my 10 tips. Hope that was helpful. Should we do a recap? I'm going to do a recap real quick. Okay. We've got diverse materials. Print those materials. Get cozy with your printed materials. Have fun with it. All right. Go back and do some automated noun foraging. Get back on the computer. Create your own notation system. Remember SIP. Be liberal, but also discerning. Highlight repeats as much as you need to. Capture synonyms and potential synonyms, identify your questions along the way, and go beyond just noun foraging. Okay, so if you want the full training on the ORCA methodology, we go into so much more detail within the masterclass. So if you want the full training on the ORCA methodology, even that first step of ORCA, this object discovery, contains so many more activities than just noun foraging. Consolidating the objects is huge, doing that collaboratively, doing list definition and instance definition, and all sorts of other stuff. If you want that full training, go to oaux.com/masterclass. That's the 22-hour online course, okay, that feeds directly into the certification if you decide to go that route. Okay, so the next stop in this series, we're going to be looking into relationship discovery. I'm going to pick out one of the juiciest nuggets, and we're going to go through all my hot tips and tricks for relationship discovery. So I will see you back here soon. Meanwhile, cheers and happy OAUXing. Thank you so much for listening. I truly hope you enjoyed this episode. Please visit objectorientedux.com/podcast for show notes. Our soundtrack is Fighter by Ruby Bell, courtesy of Sugaroo Records. Happy OAUXing!